is a pleasure for me to introduce this ceremony. It is an honor that my Faculty of Political Science at the Lewis gave me the duty to present the Laudatio for Professor Putnam. Professor Putnam is currently the Peter in this Isabel Mackin Professor of Public Policy at the Harvard University in Cambridge. And he is also a visiting professor and director in Manchester. And Professor Putnam is very important for us because he also was the dean of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, one of the examples that we consider in building up our experience here as a School of Government. And Bob, as a scholar and as dean, gave a tremendous impetus to the institutional activity of both Centra, the school, and the Centra in Harvard, opening up the study of the government. In particular, he indicated the importance of social, economic, historical condition of public policy, pushing political science to be open to incorporating other social science disciplines such as sociology, economics, history, anthropology, public law. There is no field of political science which has gone untouched by Bob's key contribution, from comparative politics to international relations and so forth. Indeed, Bob is one of the most influential political scientists in the world, according to the New York Times. I consider Bob, since a long time, most important scholar, let's say, of Alexis de Tocqueville. But then I said to Bob, I went to check in the Google Scholar to see how many citations received Bob and Tocqueville, and discovered that Bob received more citations than Tocqueville. So it's a classical example in which the scholar, the student, surpassed the master. Let me introduce you to the scientific profile of Bob. This is an academic ceremony, so we wanted to also to inform our students and our community about the work of Bob and why is important Bob for the social sciences in this country. Bob's scientific work was driven by the need to find answers to important questions, to make those questions object of empirical examination, to support such examination with parsimonious arguments, and thus to reach reliable and persuasive conclusions. The big question pursued by Bob concerned the functioning of democracy. That is, the investigation of the reason that guarantee or might guarantee the high quality of the latter. The investigation on and of democracy has been and continues to be the focus of his scientific work. For 40 years, the first volume in 1970, the last volume in 2010, I guess is the latest but not the last, Bob has asked the question that the Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville had posed after his American trip in 1831-1832. If democracy is a difficult political system, what makes then it possible? In seeking the answer, Bob has become, it seems to me, more and more Tocquevillian, in the sense that his research has ended up mirroring most of the insights of the brilliant French investigator, demonstrating their validity with the modern tools of social science. I think that if Tocqueville could have chosen his intellectual hire, he would undoubtedly appoint Bob, knowing that, as I said before, hires tend to surpass their master frequently. Why is Bob Tocquevillian? Alexis de Tocqueville was the first major political researcher who linked the good function of democracy, in his case the US, but the model was applicable to other experience, to the existence of favorable external conditions to the democratic process itself. That is, to the political culture of its citizen and elite. In that remarkable book, De la Démocratie en Amérique, the first volume published in 1835 and the second in 1840, Tocqueville concludes that American democracy has not been turned into a tyranny of the majority because of the particular ethos of its members, beside that for the particular system of separation of power introduced in Philadelphia a few decades before. If I look to Bob's work with a Tocquevillian perspective, I seem to detect this consistent evolution, although with some theoretical discontinuity. And in presenting his work, I see three basic phases of Bob's work. The first phase has to do with elite. Bob's scientific work in the 1970s took as focus political and administrative elite beliefs, way of thinking, values. And he worked on those beliefs in order to understand how political and administrative elite can help in making democracy work. The volume of that period consists of rich data on the attitude of those who govern modern democracies and the difficult relation between the administrative and political actors and the various contexts of democratic government. And the further development of this work was a very important study on the organization of the then quite new G7 summits. And in this work, Bob tried to understand the logic of negotiation within those international organizations and summits. And a very important article in this period, Diplomacy and Domestic Politics, The Logic of Two-Level Game, published in 1988, is considered still today one of the most important ever written articles on international relations. In this article, Bob considered the way in which leaders negotiate at the international level. Using the game theory approach, Bob assumed that the international negotiation between liberal democracy governments leaders consist of simultaneous negotiations that are held at both intrastate and interstate level. This framework is very useful for us because it's the framework that in some way theorized the so-called vincolo esterno that we discover later in the 90s and 2000 as a way of producing negotiation and using negotiation at international level for promoting and fostering transformation at domestic level. By connecting domestic politics with international relations, with domestic politics, Bob was among the first to question on an epistemological level the disciplinary distinction between the two. He called into question this distinction. Is it difficult to keep separate domestic and international politics? For Bob, if one wanted to understand the behavior of governments, a model was needed as to combine the analytical aspects of domestic politics investigated by comparative politics tools with those of international system. In a way, Bob contributed to this new area of studies that today is called international comparative politics. The second research phase is the most important and interesting for us as Italians. Here, the scientific work was developed during the 1980s, but the research period was initiated in the previous decade and published in the next. This period affects or focus on the Italian experience of building up the new regional government. And starting from the Raphael Hotel, a group of people used to come here as a sort of Tocqueville on reverse for detecting and monitoring the transformation of the Italian regional government. Bob's focus was in understanding the process of institutionalization of Italian region. And he did that through the gathering of a huge amount of empirical data. With the help of the then young research assistants like Bob Leonardi, who is here, who did his own career at the LSE, and Raffaella Nannetti at the University of Illinois in Chicago, Bob went through our country in long and wide in order to understand the difference between the regions of our country. And the outcome of this complex research is a book first published in Italian and then another book published by Bob, which is the basis of a very heated debate in the 90s. The book title is Making Democracy Work, Civic Tradition in Modern Italy. And this volume, in a way, brought conclusions that are a little bit worrying, at least for people like me who believe that institutions are the crucial intervening variable in understanding social behavior. According to Bob, the highly differentiated performance between the Italian region, high in the north-central region, and low in those of the south, was not to be found, or at least to be found mainly, in the structuring of those institutions, but in the social context within which they had to operate. What makes democracy work is the existence of social capital on which democracy can stand. Likewise, democracy does not work properly in the absence of that capital. Thus, with his research on the Italian region, Bob set on a new concept of the social sciences, that of social capital, a concept which since then has had an extraordinary success in social research around the world. Using a parsimonious approach, Bob deemed social capital as the social networks and the associated norms of reciprocity and trustworthiness. It is the absence of robust social networks and thus the lack of mutual trust among citizens which has rendered inefficient the region of the South and distorted their democratic functioning. Meanwhile, it has been the reverse in the North-Central region. The thesis sparked a heated debate, especially in Italy, of course, but not only in Italy. Also because Bob made recourse to a different historical trajectories in various parts of our country for motivating the absence or the presence of that social capital. According to a logic of path dependency, those different historical events had created social arrangements that were then institutionalized in relatively stable patterns of social behavior. So in the end, the proper function of democracy depends on external conditions, basically on the culture of a given community, its ability to self-organize and foster trust. Trust is a crucial word in Bob's work, trust among his members. And here is the problem for those who, like me, has a different approach. But the Bob conclusion, the conclusion of Bob's research is crucial for understanding what democracy does. If history has not given us the social capital, then must we despair of good democracy? This is a question for you, Bob, for your Lectio Magistrali. So then there is the third phase. The third phase of Bob's research aims to answer this question. It began in the 90s. It is still ongoing and more creative than ever. At this stage, Bob's research is on the organization of association in his country. And here Bob went back to Tocqueville. It was Tocqueville, in fact, who argued that a society of free individuals does not need to resort to a leviathan to regulate relations between them if and only if, among those individuals and public elite, there is a wide sphere of voluntary association that aggregate these otherwise isolated individuals to solve common problems without depending, at least entirely, on public authorities. Associations that, in the discovery of American democracy by Tocqueville, were presented as the real training ground for citizenship education. It was this deep-rooted and extensive citizen organization that allowed America to remain and prosper as a democratic country. And it was this civil infrastructure that Bob started to investigate in the early 90s, reaching also in this case troubling conclusion. First, in an essay very important, published in Journal of Democracy, and then in a book with the same title, Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community, Bob empirically showed how those Tocquevillian assumptions of American democracy were decreasing since the 1960s. Because of new information and communication technology and behavioral changes in the cultural system, Americans had dramatically reduced the predisposition to associate, thus creating patterns of social relation more and more individualized. With a formula that captured headline of many newspapers and the attention of many governmental leaders, starting from Clinton, Bob argued in recent decade, in America, the number of bowlers, those who practice bowling, were gone up, while the number of bowling leagues were gone down. And here is a serious alarm for American democracy. Then, promoting comparative research, Bob and his team aimed to investigate social capital in other democracies, concluding that its decline was not an exclusively American phenomenon. In various books, it was shown that the decline of social capital in the advanced democracy was correlated with the growth of social inequality, which is a crucial topic that Bob will talk about in his lectio magistrale. Thus falsifying the argument that participation in civil and religious associations contribute historically to the empowerment of the weakest individuals of the society. Bob, however, has not only analytically reconstructed the reason for that decline, but he has also identified the counter-tendency against that decline. In America, those counter-tendencies in particular are represented by the persistence of religious association. The country continued to be the most religious country among the advanced democracy, a country where religious practice has always been intertwined with political participation, a country where different religions compete with each other. Now the question, which is crucial for those who are dealing with this issue, how can a country so intensely religious, with so many different religions, continue to be a country so tolerant? How to conjugate religious intensity with political tolerance? So the first decade of the 21st century sees Bob engaged in research of great methodological and organizational complexity, intended to investigate the relation between religious and democracy in America. The result of this research is the recently published book with David Campbell, American Grace. In this research, the results appear much more optimistic than one would expect on the basis of the previous conclusion. In American Grace, Bob showed that religious diversity does not produce social unrest because of a specific property, the extreme porosity of the borders between the various religious communities. In America, religious communities are not closed in themselves. Each of their members are related to the member of other religious communities, as well as to those who are not religious. Each member of a religious community has experienced in her or his life other religious experiences. Religion has a social character beside its theological nature. This overlapping religious identity make possible an intense interreligious pluralism and at the same time guarantee that such pluralism works in favor of religious tolerant environment. Again Tocqueville. Tocqueville was right in highlighting the social importance of religion in America. Indeed, after him, we learned that religious pluralism has allowed and legitimated the development of political pluralism. Bob has not only confirmed that intuition, but has proved it scientifically, showing the logic that has made possible the combination of religious pluralism and political tolerance. It is hard to say, I don't know, Bob, if your conclusion is a new reproposal of the American exceptionalism. I don't know if that work that you did might be useful for European, because we are witnessing a religious pluralism in our continent as well. And we are facing the same dilemma that your country faced since the very beginning, how to make of diversity a sort of a pluribus unum. But that might be part of your lecture. So, using the most advanced tools of social science, Bob has shown that the differentiation of our society produced by immigration, but also by global transformation, in the short term may be a threat to stability, but over the medium to long term will certainly be a prerequisite of growth. This is a very unpopular conclusion for a scholar. Immigration is not as bad as many people think. This leads to the question, by which means can we connect the short and the long run? How can we build the social capital necessary to absorb the negative consequences of the short term and prepare to receive the benefits of the long term? And Bob, behind his scholarly work, is also an intellectual, socially engaged. I just mentioned here the Saguaro seminar that you, with other colleagues, set up at the Kennedy School for helping community to empower themselves. I run to my conclusion. Bob has received many numerous international awards for the originality of his scientific work, originality supported by methodological versatility uncommon among social scientists. This is important for me at least to stress. For Bob, the research method is a tool for investigating a problem. It's the problem to be solved or understood that determines the method, not the method that selects the problem to be investigated. For this reason, Bob does not belong to any of the various methodology churches that inhabit the academic world. Also, regarding the method, Bob is thus a pluralist, as he can switch from using statistical tools to those based on qualitative research frames. Bob is intellectually a liberal, open to diversity, generous in his work, rigorous in his research, and willing to change his mind if the situation demands it. He prefers to beat new paths rather than singing in a choir already organized. He has many students and friends, but not a specific school. He built institutions of higher education research, not clubs for uncritical followers and supporters. I personally verified these Bob's characteristics, both scientific and intellectual and personal, since when I was a young man, myself as well, between 1986 and 1988, I worked at Harvard with Bob at the Department of Government. For Bob, time is a scarce resource, a resource that should be administered carefully, and I learned that very soon from you. Nevertheless, he has never avoided discussion with colleagues and students. We will have a discussion this afternoon as well, and conversation with the larger public. Because of this property, not only could he maintain a network of many friends, but he also received recognition that few political scientists in the world have ever achieved. I just mentioned the most important recognition, which is the 2006 Johan Skytte Prize, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in Political Science, a prize that has been awarded by the Swedish University of Uppsala. But of course, I want also to mention some of the recognition received from Italian institutions. He has been honored by the American Political Science Association Conference Group on Italian Politics and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from this organization, and also he was honored, I didn't know that even there was a prize of this nature, as Commander in the Order of the Star of Italian Solidarity by the President of the Italian Republic in 2004. So the honorary degree in political science that is now given by Luis Guido Carli joins a long list of international awards. However, I hope, it will have a special meaning for Bob, not only because it's the first degree he has received from an Italian university. I have to stress that Bob received an honorary degree in Rome by an American university, the Cabot University, but this is the first one by a truly made in Italy university. But also because in some way it celebrates the intellectual partnership that has been institutionalized in the decade of scientific dialogue between Bob and the social sciences of this country. I do not know if this partnership is in its own way a form of social capital among scholars of different countries, although I like to think in these terms. We are grateful, Bob, for the honor you have done us by accepting this invitation from Luis Guido Carli to be awarded the honorary degree by his Faculty of Political Science. In sum, Bob, welcome to our academic community.